we're a consultancy that is set up to help get marketers and their sales channels, their customer facing channels on the same page. And we recognize that that's niche, but anybody who's worked in sales and marketing recognizes how big the gap can be sometimes between those two parts of the organization.
Welcome to What Gets Measured, a NinjaCat podcast about marketing, performance management, metrics, and effectiveness. Because what gets measured gets managed. I'm your host, Jake Sanders. Chris Wallace is the co-founder and president of Innerview, a corporate brand alignment consultancy that helps big brands translate their customer strategies into simple, clear, and actionable plans for frontline teams to execute. He's worked in a variety of marketing roles for well-known brands like Comcast and PGA, been an adjunct professor of marketing. He volunteers and sits on a committee for the Pennsylvania Big Brothers and Big Sisters, and he's here today to talk about the importance of brand alignment. Chris, welcome to the show.
Jake, thanks so much for having me. That's a humbling intro there. I appreciate it.
Well, I assume it's all true, and if it isn't, then it's a well-padded resume you have.
I know who to thank for it. Yeah, I appreciate that.
No pat on the back. Yeah, no problem. Thank you for making time with this. I figured we should just start with kind of a background on Innerview. What experiences, both positive and negative, led you to focus on brand alignment?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the everybody that works for our company, everybody at Innerview has carried a bag before, and anybody in sales knows what I mean by that. We've all had a quota. We've all, represented various products and services. If I told you the stuff I've sold over the years, you wouldn't even believe it. Okay, all over the map. So we've all been on, I guess, the receiving end of, guess what? We've got this great new thing. Guess what's coming? And you've got the marketing and product development hype train that I've been on the end of that train where you get run over. I've also been on the end of that train where the relationship is positive and strong, and it leads to great conversations with customers. But let's be honest. I mean, this is a chain. You have marketing builds, sales takes that baton, and they have to run that relay out and talk to the customer. And if the links in that chain are weak, or if they're not connected at all, you have a real breakdown. And organizations are really quick to recognize that they struggle with this. So it starts from us all having been on the receiving end of, guess what, we've got the next big thing coming, and had to actually take that story and put it into action.
And so that's and then you aligned on this idea of brand alignment, and external marketing is happening, but the internal stuff is usually ignored. I mean, is that kind of what you were seeing? Is like marketing saying this, sales is saying this, product folks are saying this, the C-suite's saying this? I mean, is that those experiences also happened, I assume?
Absolutely. And I think that, to your point, what you just described is a lot of dollars. Right. There's a lot of dollars involved with, we're going to advertise this. Getting things to market. It's actually funny. We actually just added somebody to our team who's a subject matter expert in a particular vertical, a particular industry that we work in. And he's like, colleagues and I have joked over the years that we were going to start a consultancy that helped companies help convince companies not to launch things. Because of all the money they would save by not launching them. So in our view, you have to do one of two things. You either have to back up your bet, right? We jokingly call what we do marketing insurance, because if you're going to spend all this money to drive demand, to drive, lead generation, and drive people into retail stores or calls into call centers, or whatever your frontline touch points are, whatever your customer contact points are, if you're going to invest that money, but you don't make sure that those links in the chain are strong, you set yourself up to drive a tremendous amount of waste, or to lose a lot of time. And that's ultimately what we're looking at, is how do we save companies that time? Because it's real money that these companies are investing to get things to market. Make sure that you follow through and that it works and your people are ready.
Oh my gosh. And a lot of people think, and there's a bit of hubris that goes into this, because the C-suite, the marketers, they all know what their brand is. I know what my brand is, and maybe you used a bunch of fake personas, you know, to come to this. But I wrote down a brand isn't what you say it is. It's what people say about you when you're not in the room.
Yeah.
And I think you hinted on this idea of listening mechanisms, and I wanted you to kind of expose and unpack that listening mechanisms and how do they gather frontline sentiment and check their egos, you know?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think so the typical organization, the typical brand is going to know what their customers think of them, right? We talk about the before, the during, and the after. Most companies are investing these days to learn what their customers think of them before the customer ever shows up. So they're doing market research to say, what do customers want? And then they're doing customer satisfaction or NPS surveys on the back end to say, well, how did we deliver on what we thought they were looking for? But during when person is talking to person, when brand is interacting, when brand representative is interacting directly with that customer, most organizations have no idea what's going to happen in that moment, right? That's the moment of truth, but they don't know what's going to happen in that moment. So we look at it and we say, okay, if there's two audiences involved in that conversation, look at them as both as audiences to be marketed to. So one, you got there by marketing to them, but the other being the people who represent you, and that could be employees, it could be channel partners, it could be retailers, whoever's out there representing your brand. Looking at them, looking at how they're processing your message and your brand positioning and your product's value proposition, how they're processing those things as if they were a buyer of it, as if they were a consumer of it, not just a messenger of it, we believe gives them a glimpse into, okay, there are a lot of different people who can influence decision making around our brand or decision making around buying our brand or buying our products. Let's understand all of those audiences, not just the customer, because there's a lot of leverage in getting your frontline teams, getting your customer facing teams really bought in. Think about the brands that do this well. The leverage is in that moment of truth when person is talking to person.
And so give me an example, like who's slamming that home, do you think?
I mean, I think, I don't want to use the same, when I do shows, I don't want to use the same brands all the time, but I'll throw out one that comes up, but might not be one people think of every single day. Subaru. So Subaru is a brand that has a little bit of a different positioning than most other car companies, right? Love is what makes Subaru Subaru. That's their tagline. But to get that from their U.S. headquarters, which is right across the river here, right across from Philadelphia in New Jersey, to get that from their corporate headquarters down to all these dealerships and drive that cult of brand that they have, they do it in a very successful way, right? There really is there's an attachment that both their dealers, their dealership employees, and their customers have to that brand, and it's all aligned. It's all congruent. They all buy into it. So I think they're a brand that does a great job.
And then, so those listening mechanisms, I mean, is it just kind of taking in all of that stuff and then saying, hey, people like it. Oh, people hate it. Oh, people are indifferent. Maybe some people don't want to put too much stock into those listening mechanisms because the thoughts and they're all over the place, and they're like, well, we know what we're doing. How do you check your ego with that stuff and saying, hey, these people seems like they're complaining, but they might actually have something, or these people are saying something happy. Maybe there's something we can learn from there. Do you see people unwilling to check their egos?
Yes. So I'm going to give you two answers. I'm going to give you the straight answer, and I'm going to give you the call it the scientific or academic answer. Okay.
All right.
The straight answer is anytime you start an interaction with an audience, a person, an individual, you start by listening. You are already on better footing for that relationship than if you don't listen. Okay. If you start by talking at your people, okay. Let's be honest. If I've read one article in the Wall Street Journal about how it's power to the employees right now, I just read another one this morning. I've read 50 of them, and your people can decide what they get behind and what they don't. Nobody's firing anybody today. Let's be honest. They're not firing people. So people can say, no, I'm not going to talk about that. Or I don't like what they have to say. Or I'm just here for a paycheck. So the bar has been raised for organizations to reach their people. If you want to reach them, listening is a great way to start. So human nature would tell us, the straight answer is human nature tells us that if you start out by listening, you've drawn people in and you've put that relationship sort of in, on a better track.
Right.
I would say the more academic answer to it is the people are always going to take research with a grain of salt, right? They're always going to take research with a grain of salt. But I look at it and say, one of the interesting things about the tool that we use, our in-front platform that we've built to do this frontline listening, is we have really set this up to be something that is, it's different than any other information that they have. And we don't bill it as foolproof, even if it's directional, right? Even if it's directional, if we can say, you did not understand this audience yesterday, and now we're giving you data that is a glimpse inside their mindset as it relates to the product you just asked them to sell, aren't you incrementally better off by having that information than you were before? So it should guide decision making. Is it gospel? No, I don't think any data is gospel, but I certainly think it can guide a more informed strategy and a more informed decision making process to support your frontline teams better.
And this leads beautifully into the next question, because we do talk about data and analytics on this podcast. And in our prep conversation for this, you scoffed at the trope of every org says it's data driven. Like, oh, everybody's data driven. I'm driven by data. And well, what does the data say?
I thought that was off the record. No,
I'm putting it in. And you will be held. You will be held to account. But talk about this data driven thing, and then how some people are just like, they just stub that data out. I mean, is that kind of what it is? Or they're like, oh, that's not what my gut says? Or what's this kind of scoffing at data driven?
One of the things that I love about being a consultant and somebody who comes in to help organizations look at things differently is you can be more truthful from our side of things.
Right.
And I think a lot of times people inside of organizations, they take the party line. Oh, we're a data-driven organization. We don't do anything unless it's backed up by data. I think that's a falsehood. I think that we're in the data business. I believe in data. The reason you say I scoff at it is the idea of, be realistic about how data driven you really are. Just be realistic about it. And if you are, that's great. But you can't be data driven when it's convenient, and then not data driven if the data doesn't confirm the direction you want to go, or doesn't confirm your hunch, you can't not be data driven then, right? So I think that there's a lack of I think it's more than anything, it's a lack of consistency. I think it sounds good and feels good to say we are data driven, but there may be people that are data driven, but generally speaking, organizations, now I'm sure there's plenty of companies out of Silicon Valley or tech businesses and things like that are data driven, but the majority of people that we run into that are selling, consumer products, consumer services, there is still a level of feel in these things. And I would say, even though we're in the data business, you do have to take it with a grain of salt. It's learn what you can, put the whole picture together, and then figure out how to use that information, like I said, to make better decisions, to inform decision making. It's not going to make the decisions for you. People who pretend that the data is guiding all their decisions are fooling themselves.
I love that. Well, it's only the data. And you're like, really? It's just you at 2 a.m. worried or something like that. But what you said is so great. Don't be data driven when it's convenient, and then undata driven when it's not. Like, just be consistent. There's so much there. I wanted you to tell us a story about brand alignment that you've worked with, a client or seen out in the wild that's gone great. And also tell us, like, what kind of horrible stuff awaits for the companies that are unaligned with their brand.
Yeah. So in terms of something that we've seen out like you said, out in the wild, we talk about being in the trenches all the time. We've been in the trenches a lot. I think that, there's a couple that we've seen go well. We did work with really one of the projects I'm most proud of is we did work with a diamond jewelry brand, and a big online diamond jewelry brand. And what we really helped them do, they're a digital first business, but they have a call center team that takes phone calls. And they have a very distinct brand, and they're a .com era success story. They've been around since the boom, early 2000s. Some of your listeners will not remember those times, but I remember those times. And they've survived, the test of time, and been a very successful, retail and e-commerce brand. And who they were telling their customers were through all of their digital advertising, and how customers were interacted with or handled when they called in, was very, very different, and not bad. I don't want to say that it was bad. It was just misaligned. And we took a deep look at who the brand wanted to be, what made the brand successful, what their reputation was built around. And all we did was help their teams embrace the customers come to you because of X, Y, and Z. When they call you, you're not giving them that. You're giving them something that's good, but it's not what they clicked for, right? It's not what they thought they were getting when they clicked. When you bring the authenticity of the brand into congruency, into alignment with how customers are served, it really is a very powerful, and it's a very powerful force. So in that
Love that.
instance, people who they didn't consider themselves salespeople. They didn't want to be called salespeople. The sales was a 4-letter word in that organization, and we didn't use the word sales. We focused on this in a couple of different ways. But how did we measure it? We measured it in sales, right? And what happened to their sales? Their conversion rate went up by a third, 33% increase in conversion, just simply by leaning into the hallmarks of their brand that made them so popular and acting in a way that was consistently, their sales went way up, right? And diamonds aren't a cheap endeavor. So from a revenue standpoint, it had a significant impact on their organization.
But sales is a 4-letter word. I mean, you just there are so many marketers out there that I'm just here to kind of get the ideas going, and maybe take little bits of this low hanging fruit and make a pie. I also don't have a budget. So it's weird that at the end of the day, the marketers are gauged, and measured in sales, but they think it's sort of a 4-letter word. Can you kind of get on this dichotomy? What happened here? When did marketers just become so disassociated with selling? Even brand owners, businesses, they're like, well, I want to create a community. And you're like, yeah, you're going to have to pay back that loan and you better sell some stuff.
Absolutely. So I don't know if it makes people uncomfortable. I mean, I think we're actually in a really unique era as it relates to selling, and we're doing a lot of work with our clients right now. And I think this is good for marketers to hear. And again, we're in call centers with telecom companies, and we're in retail stores with flooring brands and flooring retail. We're in real consumer categories, right? Banking, consumer banking. We're in real categories. And here's what we're seeing consistently and how we are coaching our clients and coaching frontline teams. People don't have the time to kick tires. The idea of selling is more about companies and brands getting out of their own way to get the customer what they want and what they showed up for than it is having to do any. I think that people think of selling in the way that Alec Baldwin and Glenn Ross from movies from the 80s and 90s, where selling was a song and dance, right? Where it was an orchestrated endeavor. And the way we are coaching our clients right now to approach this is they want to buy. People want to buy. So set up an experience. All this comes back to customer experience. I think a customer experience mentality has replaced selling as sort of that predominant, customer thinking. But at the end of the day, selling is about creating an environment that makes things easy for people. It's not about well, I have a price. Think about how auto buying is. And auto buying, I think, is getting better. But traditionally, that's been one of those you need to take a shower when you get home. But the reality is it's not like that anymore. The consumers have so much information. Just get out of your own way and make it easy for them to buy and enable a purchase. Don't sell, enable a purchase, and enable people to buy.
Yes. And then give us a horror story of things that oh my gosh, everyone's on a completely different spreadsheet. Everybody is just all over the place. I mean, do you have any horror stories or maybe instances where you tried to come in there and help and it just didn't work? Or you don't have to name names.
I'm gonna tell a horror story that is something we see consistently. I'm not going to call out a brand on this, but I'm going to give you a horror story that is probably a nightmare that a lot of your listeners have run into. Okay?
Perfect.
It's the launch is coming, and we train the team. They're ready. They're trained. Everybody's trained. Okay. And we're about to turn on the marketing. We're about to turn on the response engine. We're about to turn on the phone calls. We're turning on the ads. We're getting this ramped up. They're trained. And then information, starts rolling in, the results start rolling in, you're wondering why the results aren't there. Ask your team, why are, what's going on? Why are we not selling more of this? We need more training. Okay, well, we're going to train the team again. We have seen this time and time and time again, that you end up in this doom loop of, we trained them. We gave them all the information. We shared all the facts with them. They're trained. Check that box. And then they were never really enabled to tell the story, to really understand what portion of it are they telling. They're given a lot of facts. They're given a lot of information. And then when they don't see the results, frontline teams are great at getting corporate teams to chase their tail for a while. If you're not selling a product, if the frontline teams, if the salespeople or the whoever, call center teams, they're not selling something, and somebody comes to them and says, why aren't we selling more of this? They know the answers that are going to, either they don't know what to ask for, or they know the things that are going to send, corporate spiraling for a few months before they actually figure out what to do next. And usually the result is more product training. Product training is not a solution to get people excited about products. Facts don't get people excited about products. Think about politicians. Think about how politicians get people excited. Do politicians deal in facts? Politicians deal in facts. They deal in stories. They deal in emotion. And you want to get people excited. You want to get people bought in. You want to get people to adopt. You've got to try a different way. You've got to tell the story in a different way. The horror stories are always we did everything right, and we think we did everything right, and the results aren't there, and another launch is floundering. What we encourage people to do is say, if you've done it the same way every time, you keep getting the same results, you got to try something different.
Oh my gosh. And can you quickly just kind of mention how external brand messaging and internal brand messaging, do they need to be the exact same thing for everything to sing? Or is it that sort of like interpretation? Like, I know we say this, but we don't do this, or is like, I'm just kind of wondering about that dichotomy of like, there's so many great marketing campaigns for crappy products. And then those things just fly off the shelves. And then there's so many great products that have very limited marketing means. And then they end up, going the way of the dodo, and you're like, what happened? It's, can you kind of speak to that dichotomy? Like why is there such a weird prioritization and it's missing? And then some things just fly off the shelves and they're horrible, but I don't know. Like, was that a question?
I've never been. It's funny. I really like that question. I've never been asked that question before, and we talk about this a lot at our organization. So I love the chance to answer that. I'm going to say, does it need to be the same? We sat with a client one time, and he goes, "We're great at putting the message up on a billboard, but when the phone rings, the experience that they get doesn't match what we said on the billboard. And they spend a lot of money on billboards. They spend a lot of money on everything." And my answer to that is no. Brand alignment, when we talk about brand alignment, and listen, when we say brand, at the end of the day, it all comes back to value proposition, right? It's all about the value proposition. Is the value proposition that got the person to call or walk into your store, does it match the experience that they're getting, right? And the answer is, I don't think they don't need to match exactly, because if you see something on a billboard and you walk into a retail store, the context for what you saw and then being in the retail store is different, but they need to understand what portion of the story they need to tell, right? A retail employee might need to, be in a different chapter than somebody in a call center, or it depends on the setting, it depends on the context. So in that regard, I don't think it's not about verbatim matching. It is about the overall message aligning back to the same principles and the same core, the same core value. And if people understand what the overall proposition is, and then the aspects of it that they're going to be most effective telling and engaging customers around, that's where I think you have alignment as a brand. It's not about scripting. It's not about everybody saying it's the exact same.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, that's great too. I mean, like, speak on that though, because people are like, follow the script, do not improvise. You're like, because I've been in many call centers where they're like, read the words, and then you're like, well, somebody has a very kind of jocular nature. They're kind of like bringing some of that vivaciousness to the calls. Is How is the brand alignment a way to unlock the potential of someone, or is it a way to lock them down into the script?
Unlock for sure. I mean,
Yeah.
absolutely. I mean, what we do is we talk about it as like guardrails and lines on a road, but
Mm.
not putting them on a fixed track and making everybody go in the same direction. You want to give people the opportunity to be individuals. I mean, if there's one word that's truly overused in marketing, it's authenticity.
Oh
But
yeah.
when you talk about the person with the vivacious nature and things like that, who typically succeeds, right? It's those people who put a little personality into it. Brands should create, and companies, any company should create an environment where people understand the core. Like I'll keep going back to it. What is the core? What are the guardrails? What are the guideposts? What are the things that are sort of the truisms around the value that we offer customers? Make sure they're locked in on those, but in between those, let them drive the way that they want. Some people are going to go a little faster. Some people are going to go a little slower. Some people want to ride a little bit toward the middle. Let's give people the freedom to be able to be individuals. Brands can and should do that. Brands that try to turn people into robots, that doesn't work. Good brands attract people who sort of are bought in the first place, and that certainly helps. But even if you're not at that level yet, giving people the ability to have a little bit of freedom within the lines, I think is key.
Oh, that's beautiful. I'm thinking as a musician too. It's like as a jazz musician too. Like they're like, just you're playing whatever you want, and you don't understand that I'm playing off of strict guidelines, stylistic, formulaic, like all those things. I'm playing off strict things, and then I'm taking it up. So you. To have that freedom, you need to really drill in the fundamentals. And I think that's just brilliant. But you've said so many wonderful things about data-driven, convenient stuff, how listening is important, giving people some breadth and some grace in the way that they can take their experience and make it their own. The horror story about people are trained, but we need more training. But if you could consolidate all of this, Chris, into one fine little, maybe couple sentences, if you could give one piece of advice to the audience about brand alignment, what would it be?
It has to start with listening. I mean, everything, like alignment in any relationship starts with understanding the other party. And I think that when you asked earlier about marketing and not understanding sales, and in some cases vice versa, we're a consultancy that is set up to help get marketers and their sales channels, their customer facing channels on the same page. And we recognize that that's niche, but anybody who's worked in sales and marketing recognizes how big the gap can be sometimes between those two parts of the organization. You want to have a good relationship with anybody in your personal life, in your work life, or between two big silos within big companies. Listening is a great way to knock down walls. And if you're a marketer that's got a big budget and a big launch coming up, and you want to get it right, if you start by listening, to your customers, listen to your people too.
Boom. This has been so wonderful. Thank you so much for your time. If people want to learn more about you and connect with you online, how can they do that, Chris?
Yeah, best way to reach me. So on LinkedIn, so Chris Wallace is not an uncommon name.
Really?
So you'll see many people with the name Chris Wallace. So I'm in the greater Philadelphia area, and you'll see Innerview. Inner, by the way, Innerview, like taking an interview of your brand. The other way is to learn more about the listening mechanism and the platform that we've set up called Infront. Infrontinsights.com is the website for that. And it has all the information about what we're learning, how we're measuring alignment, how we're measuring advocacy of your frontline teams, really giving organizations a great glimpse into it. And on that page, I'd be remiss not to mention, when we talk about listening, we actually have a guide to frontline insights, which is any organization can download that. And if you want to start listening to what your teams have to say, even without us, we give you some really great pointers about how to get that listening set up.
Cheese or chocolate?
Are you ready?
Let's go.
Cheese or chocolate?
Cheese.
Golf or Rolf, the dog from the Muppets?
Golf.
I just wanted to say golf or Rolf, but I had to explain it. Then I had Dolph Lundgren, and I didn't go with it. But anyway, we move on. Hot dogs or hamburgers?
Oh man, it's like asking me to choose between my children. I'm going.
Chris's kids' names are not hot dog and hamburger. I just want everybody to know.
One of my children prefers hot dogs and the other prefers hamburgers for whatever that's worth. I'm going. A ball game would never be the same without a hot dog. I'm going hot dog.
Done. Swim with sharks or safari with lions?
Swim with sharks. Not by much though. Close one.
They're low. You're listening to yourself, Chris. I like that. Would you rather get $10,000 or let your best friend get $100,000?
Oh, best friend, $100,000.
And then would you be like, oh, by the way, I made that happen? Do you think I could?
I'm just a pragmatic person. I'm like 10 to 1, like all day long. I take 10 to 1 all day long.
Awesome. Big heart over there. All right. And finally, and perhaps most contentiously, Stevie Ray Vaughan or Jimi Hendrix?
For what?
For like a gardener.
Or better guitar player, better music. You got to give me a little more than that.
I guess I just was thinking you got two great guitar players. Both of them have some pretty hot and spicy legacies. Left us with a lot of flavor in our ears.
So I don't normally get this personal on these calls, okay? But
okay.
I'm gonna give a little tip of the cap to my late mom, who was a huge Stevie Ray Vaughan fan. So I remember growing up, I'll never hear Stevie Ray without thinking of my mom. So I'm tipping the cap to mom and going Stevie Ray.
What Gets Measured is a NinjaCat podcast. Please rate and review the show wherever you find your podcasts. Share this episode on social and visit us on the web at ninjacat.io.